does. Internal control, we do not issue no audits issue on your financial statements. Certainly from testing and also those are kind of just highlights we want to point out, various estimates that are in your financial statements. Really nothing new. There's always estimates in any financial statement reporting process. We just want to give you a little bit more detail on what they are. In all cases, we applied audit procedures to those. And again, assessed your assumptions and made sure that those are reasonable and in compliance with the standards, and then also in comparison to your peers and what they're doing. So again, noted no issues, no problems with any of those estimates. Page 3, and then concluding on page 4 is just kind of a bullet point listing of any kind of issues we had, and we didn't have anything out of the ordinary. No problems, no disagreements with management, which would be pretty rare actually. So. The management representation, again, the audit concluded with a representation letter signed by members of the management of the city, June 5th, 2017. And that letter follows at the end of this letter. So the bulk of what I want to talk about is on page 5, city governmental fund balances. And what we're doing here is really bringing in summary financial information. This is directly off your financial statements. It's a little bit easier to talk about in 2 or 3 pages here than to page through a large document. So if you look at the general fund, obviously the main operating fund of the city, total general fund balance ended the year $13,591,000 as compared to $15,470,000 a year ago, 12/31/15. And we have to look at the components of that $13,591,000, and there's really 4 components of fund balance, and this is a hierarchy. It's most restrictive on the top, down to the least restrictive on the bottom. So the top, non-spendable, $207,000 in inventories and prepaid items, $43,000 in county-held special assessments, and $93,000 in water special assessments. All 3 of those are non-spendable. What that means is you have no access to them. They're part of the $13 million as a receivable, as an asset, but you don't have money. You don't have the money. You don't have access to them. You hope to get that money. That's why it's a receivable, and that's why it's included in the $13 million. But it's non-spendable form as of December 31/16. And you move down the hierarchy and you have committed. So anything below that line or below the non-spendable, you have access to. But there's various commitments. Committed fund balance is internally committed. It's formally committed by City Council. $1,914,000 is committed for continuing appropriations into 17 budget, and then future unreported medical claims of $854,000. So you've set aside some money there. Coming off the $13 million for future expenditures. Then you're left with assigned, and again, assigned and committed are very similar. They're earmarked funds, a particular purpose, but assigned is a little bit less formal. It doesn't require formal action and a little bit less restrictive. Still an internal assignment though. $1,409,000 subsequent year's budget. Again, those are your carryover funds, your earmarked funds into applied funds into 17 budget. Then you're left with really the important number, and that's the unassigned fund balance. $9,068,000, up from $8,802,000. So while total fund balance decreased, actually your unassigned increased slightly, but pretty flat. So that's really what you're carried over into the 2017 budget. And if you flip to page 6 real quick, and we'll go back and forth here between 5 and 6, you can see exactly what I just talked about in the top chart there. The total line, all the different colors added together, are your total fund balance, and then each component. So you can see that while fund balance as a whole kind of changed a little bit, and we're back down to kind of a normal level there in the 5-year trend, the orange part, the unassigned, has remained relatively flat, and that's exactly what you want to happen. You want to have that unreserved, unassigned fund balance available for emergencies. If you look at the table right below that, it translates that $9,068,000 into a percentage, because again, it varies by size of municipality, size of the city, size of the village, size of the county, whatever we're talking about, as to whether 9 million is a big number or a small number. So what we do is we convert that, take 9,068,000 into your expenditures, and divide that into your expenditures, and arrive at a percentage. And then you can compare. Then you can compare municipality to municipality. You can also compare year to year. So you can see that red line is your unassigned fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. It's roughly at a little under 50% there. The blue line represents your minimum. That's your policy. Minimum of 25%. Really 25 to 30% is the range that you want to be at. That's also the range that we recommend based on the industry standards as a minimum. So you're certainly meeting that requirement. And that's important because when you have unforeseen events, when you have unbudgeted events, that's what your carryover is for. So certainly good to have that available. Turn quickly back to page 5. And I won't go through each one of these, but special revenue funds, $7,815,000. You can see them all listed there, the majority being in the sewer fund, and then also the capital improvements fund. Those are monies that are much like your committed or assigned fund balance in the general fund, but they meet requirements to be outside of the general fund. And when they meet that requirement, then they're in their own individual separate fund. So you can see that $7,815,000. You have $567,000 restricted for debt service fund. That has to be used for future debt retirement, long-term debt retirement. And you have capital project funds totaling $1,860,000, $702,000 in public work construction. This is where your TIF districts 6 and 7 are located here, $18,000 and $34,000 respectively for 6 and 7. And you have stormwater management, municipal building improvement, and then equipment replacement. So those are all your future capital project monies carried over, which will be used for future projects in 17 and beyond. You have one unassigned in aquatics and riverfront construction, which will be funded in subsequent years. Total government fund balances as a whole, $23,833,834. So very consistent, up slightly overall from 15. Questions on that? Page 7, I won't really cover. What this is in here for is simply as an analysis for you and for City Council to just see how you got to that fund balance. So this is really your income statement. You can kind of see the breakdown of your revenues and expenses. And the only thing I'll say about that page is if you had all municipalities laid out, they look very similar to this. Obviously taxes and intergovernmental being by far the majority of your revenues, and then public safety and public works being the majority of your expenses. That's very common. Page 8 switches gears a little bit and talks about the health insurance operating results. So the city has established a health self-insurance program for city employees and retirees. So here we focus more on the operational side. We focus more on the income statement. $4,559,000 for charges to city departments, shown as a revenue here. Compare that to claims, administrative, and other expenses totaling $5,120,000. So you had an operating loss of $560,000. Interest income of $10,000 adding to that, so a total net change in fund balance of a negative $549,000. So you can see your fund balance in that fund of $1,404,000 came down to $854,000. Obviously, you watch that obviously, and certainly take a look at your levels there and make sure, because another couple of years of losses like that, and there won't be anything left in there. So. Page 9 kind of continues that thought as far as a proprietary type nature of a fund, and talks about the Wisconsin Rapids Waterworks and Lighting Commission operating results and also the rate of return. So again, we focus more on the rate of return here because much like the fund balance, the dollars are relative to the size. And if we convert that to a rate of return, much like any other investment that you would have, that's a little bit easier to understand. So we'll go down that real quick here. Electric utility on the left, water utility on the right, with a comparison. Electric utility had average rate base of $29,450,000 in 2016, and you can see the calculation there. Starts with utility plant and decrease any reserve for depreciation. And that's kind of a baseline there, and you apply that to operating income for the audit, $2,721,000, and then there's some additions and subtractions to get to a reconciled operating income per the Public Service Commission, because again, that's what your rates are based on. And that calculates out to a rate of return of 7.27%, and you can see that 5-year trend on the graph below in red. So that's up from a few years ago when you adjusted your rates. Your authorized rate of return is 5.75. So oftentimes we see that once a rate is adjusted, it kind of fluctuates a little bit, and then after 3-4 years, it kind of settles back to where it's supposed to be. Certainly a much better condition than you were 2 years ago at almost a 0% rate of return. Water utility, again, $24,167,000 as a rate base. Divide that into $966,000, which is your operating income, which is reconciled to the Public Service Commission amount. Calculates out to 4% even. Your authorized rate of return is 6%. So you can see that while still pretty reasonable rate of return at 4%, it is operating a little bit less than your authorized rate of return of 6%. So certainly not alarming. Anywhere between 4 and 5% is really the reasonable. 5 and 8, I guess, but 7 and 8 is becoming less of a reality for water utilities in these days. So again, pretty good shape, both water and electric. Any questions on any of that financial information? Again, it's meant just as a highlight to supplement the financial statements. Letter concludes on page 10. New reporting requirements for TIF districts, for tax incremental districts. This is statewide. The State Department of Revenue kind of clarified some of their rules and made some new rules that were effective this summer, which you're in full compliance with. Those elements are there. The gist of it is really the TIF districts and municipalities now are going to be required to have an annual meeting and required to prepare an annual report to the Department of Revenue. So not much different than what was required before as part of your audit process and so forth. They're just formalizing it, and now Department of Revenue kind of can download all the TIF district data in the entire state and see how things are going. And then also the meeting gets that out, and the Joint Review Board gets to discuss that. Overall, it's very positive, very, very transparent, and very positive discussions to be had at that Joint Review Board, at least in general. So, any other questions about the audit in general, or any other general questions? I'd certainly be happy to answer.
I got a couple questions. Mr. Chairperson, can I?
Go ahead. Of course.
I got too many here. I'm not going to ask all these. But one thing that I noticed, we've got almost $9 million of uncollateralized. I apologize.
Yes.
Kubishak. I'm city alderperson,
Yes.
District 7.
Sure.
We've got almost $10 million of uncollateralized funds. Is that typical for a municipality our size?
It tends to be, yeah. I mean, again, you have to remember that this is as of one point in time. The disadvantage of financial reporting and the way it is it's as of a day, December 31. Well, what does that coincide with? All of your tax collections.
Yeah.
So it's still an issue. Obviously, we put it in the report for that reason, because it's a risk. But what you have to also consider in that discussion or that thought process is that is a temporary thing. Now, if it was $10 million all 12 months of the year, well, that'd be a little different story. Again, it is a risk. Some municipalities, are more sensitive to that than others. But in this case, you'd have to annualize that and see the cash flow, because some municipalities have that huge amount, and then in February and March it's down to almost nothing.
Yeah, you have your January settlement, your February
Correct.
settlement.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're going to be looking at is kind of contacting the banks and looking at, collateralizing those deposits at year end, and because that's one of the things with collateralizing is they have to actually have a third party hold securities in the city's name and things like that. That comes at a cost and things like that. So, but that's one of the things that we plan to look into.
Are there short-term securities that we could purchase like that for a 3-month? And it is a cost, but I think it's also a cost of doing business too.
Right.
Yeah, but you have to keep in mind, and there's 20 different things you can do to mitigate that risk, obviously, from an investment side. Some of them are extremely safe to where you don't even have to worry about it, and the return is zero, basically, almost zero. Others, which a lot of municipalities have done portions of their investments in those. Cedars, things like that, which is, again, the return comes way down. That's the cost. You have to pay fees into that. Then there's other things where banks will collateralize things, and you have to be careful there because, again, while it's collateralized, you have to make sure it's properly collateralized, because a collateral agreement is just a piece of paper.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I've read somewhere it says in the event of a default of the bank, you're going to be in with general creditors. Well, that doesn't mean anything to that. Just a piece of paper, basically. It doesn't give you any safety other than what you have now, and it comes at a cost. So you have to be careful there. A lot of new things are coming out now, and banks are doing a really good job. Financial institutions are doing a really good job in coming up with different ways to provide some safe alternatives, at least for some of the money, and temporary. And there's some third-party agreements where they'll put the money in a third party. And again, it's not free, obviously, but certainly stuff to look at and consider.
And then the other thing that really stood out to me, and like I said, I'll touch base with you later. I'll touch base with Tim later too with different things. Is our OPEBs are trending higher and higher over the last 3 years, and there isn't a very big window to really look at that, at least in the audit report itself. Is that an unfortunate trend that's going to continue to happen? Is that something that we can buy down with available unassigned fund balance? Are there options that, because if we keep on going, we're not going to be sustainable at all?
I would say that with the actions that the council has taken by new hires, I do believe it's after 2012, aren't eligible for retiree health insurance. So we have basically a segregated group that's calculating the OPEB. And as those people retire and come off our insurance and things like that, that liability is starting to trend downward. The things is, a lot of it has to do with the change in your OPEB could just be the assumed rate of return. There's a lot of assumptions that go into those things. It's done every 2 years. And I actually have an email from kind of explaining the differences in some of those changes in those assumptions that can affect what the liability is from study to study.
But yeah, obviously the long run, if it's a 30-year window, we want to see it decreasing. But unfortunately, with the GASB 76 now is requiring us to see that. And I think that's a good thing. The question is, do we really want to have all this written in a public audit report? I believe being as transparent as possible is wonderful. But yeah, seeing that small trend, there isn't enough years to really show an up and down, and it's just increasing for the last 3 years, and it's like, kind of scary that way as an organization.
Yeah, and the reality is retiree benefits, they really escalated when health insurance costs really escalated. So then that liability went up, and right now, kind of like with when you have levy limits and expenditure restraint, it's difficult. A lot of municipalities aren't pay as you go. You have this liability; it's an actuarial liability, but we're budgeting and paying that liability. What's coming due in the current year, things like that. But the proactive action that we did take is that employees as of a certain date are no longer eligible. We also negotiated into our police and fire union contracts also. So.
Yeah, to make it even more complicated on the financial statements is not only do you have your OPEB, which is based on your benefits, but now you have the Wisconsin Retirement System liability. It was an asset a year ago when I was here talking, and that you don't have any control over. That's really based on the state of Wisconsin. Again, an actuary takes a look at the entire Wisconsin Retirement System pension and says, here's how much are in the investments statewide, here's how much are in the participants' money, and then they develop either it's an asset or a liability. Last year, the first year that was implemented, and on your statements with the new GASB, was an asset. So everyone was kind of like, yeah. And now it's a liability, and all indications are in 17 it's going to be another liability. So the takeaways there, though, it's like 98% funded. 96% funded. It's pretty good. It's pretty close. Now, what just like the actuarial OPEB factors and assumptions that change, so does this rate of return, whether or not timing-wise of the investments. I mean, if the market all of a sudden starts to go down in the fourth quarter, the valuation is going to be less than it probably will be in the first quarter of the next year. So all that stuff plays into that. You have to stand back and say, if we're at 104 the first year of implementation, then we're at 98%, and then roughly about the same. Long term, if you kind of zoom out to 20 years, that's going to be like a flat line, and that's what you want. Other states are struggling in the 40-50% range funded. Wisconsin is not, so that's excellent. But it also shows up again in the efforts to be transparent and provide all that information on the financial statements. Every GASB is trying to do that. It's making it even more confusing to some people, and in some cases it adds to the 3-4 pages of footnotes just for that one thing alone.
Sure.
So. But again, now you can see it. Now 5 or 10 years from now, you'll be able to see that trend. So, good questions.
All right.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
A motion to accept the 2016 audit report.
I'll make
Thanks,
a
John.
motion.
Thank you.
All right, second that motion.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
No.
Oh. Item number 3, consider approval of a contract for tax assessment services with Forward Appraisal LLC, which includes an interim market update revaluation for 2018.
So I think in your packet you saw the proposal from Steve's firm. I guess, I don't know, Steve, if you had anything to say or Sue.
If you had any questions, what we're proposing, because all my contract is what it is, I guess, but there's not much changes this year, but there was an increase put in there for the next prior 2 years. But the interim, we did a revaluation in 2013 for the city, and what we do is we track it each year, look at sales, and what it's really indicating, I think right now, is that we're a little low on upper end houses, a little high on the lower end houses. And as we look at the sales, it kind of does that. And you kind of think one year is one thing and the next year is another, and you kind of watch it to make sure and stuff. And then we also in 2017, the Department of Revenue or the state basically coming out with the Volume 2, which is a new cost guide that we will be incorporated into our software for next year. So we will be redoing all the depreciation and everything on it at that point, which is a good time. And the Department of Revenue have always kind of went this way. They wanted to go countywide at one point, and one of the things was is to try to keep the values at 100%. When we did the revaluation 5 years ago, we had some properties changing by 30-35%, where some were at 5%, 10%, and you don't want them in equities. What you try to do is keep it pretty level that in a 5-year period. Normally, I would think if we have a 3% growth, which Wisconsin Rapids used to have each year, you would say about 15%, but I don't think that's going to happen. We're looking at probably 5 to 10% changes. We're still in compliance, so I mean, as far as the Department of Revenue says, we don't have to, but I think it's a good process that you don't do I don't expect the city to ever have to go through a full reval again. The records are all up to date, all the sketches, we are in compliance with everything that's sketched with the Department of Revenue. And so all we have to do is basically, between the sales and the building permits, we keep up the records each year, and we'll make our determination next year on values and upgrade it. And hopefully the changes will be very minor, and it keeps the tax rate down a little bit usually too, as long as budgets stay in line. So that's the purpose of it. It's the inequities that you start to find after a period of time. It used to be about every 10 years, but then you would do a full reval for about $250,000. So at the cost to do that. So. Any questions?
I would just add, we've been very happy with the service, at least in my experience. No reason, I think, at this stage to go any further than currently what we provided.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the contract for tax assessment services and Forward Appraisal LLC, which includes an interim market update revaluation for 2018.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the contract. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 4, consider approval of a request from Public Works Superintendent Paul Vollert to purchase 2 snowplows to attach to 2 new loaders purchased this past spring.
You really need the plows to go with the loaders?
So as you recall, back in February, we approved purchase of 2 loaders and took delivery of those July 1st. When we approved that, I just mentioned that the reason we weren't purchasing the plows at the time was so that they didn't sit for 6 months and lose the warranty on them. So
Good move.
we received 3 proposals, which are shown there. Wausau Equipment out of Milwaukee, they submitted a proposal, but their proposal didn't really meet much of the requirements. So he was supposed to resubmit one and he failed to do so in a timely fashion. So it's our recommendation to purchase the 2 loader plows from Hankey Manufacturing for the total of both of them together is $57,850 for the 2 machines.
I was going to ask why there's such a huge difference.
So part of it is just the build of it. Wausau Equipment, well, they all have different levels of them. We currently have 4 plows from Wausau Equipment. It's called Schmidt Everest is the manufacturer's name that they're under. Virtually the lower priced ones was just his run-of-the-mill normal manufacturing. When Jim purchased these last ones, he had a lot of things beefed up, and they still, after about 5 years, they were shot. So that's one of the reasons why we're concerned with Wausau Everest. The Hankey plow is thicker steel, more industrial. They make stuff for heavy equipment, where the Wausau Equipment was stuff that's a lot of time is mounted on truck plows so that they don't quite have the meat behind them to push around. So like I said, we do have Schmidt Everest stuff. That's what Wausau Equipment makes. It just he was going to come back with a refigured number with the heavier stuff on it, but he just didn't get it back to us.
And you need the options, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Yeah, part of it is we have taken two graders out of our fleet and replaced them with loaders. So it's quoted with a 10-foot wing. With a 12-foot wing in majority of the city, we can plow the streets with 1 pass. With a 10-foot wing, we have to make a 3rd pass. Or sorry, it's virtually a 2nd pass on half the street. So with the 12-foot wing, we're allowed to get through town quicker, I guess, is because we can do it in 1 pass in each direction instead of making the 3rd. The optional mechanical float and the installation, he suggested that we have them do the installation just because he said he's seen companies waste 40 hours on installing it where they can do it in a day and a half. So with our normal schedule at this time of the year, we're starting to switch things over. So if it was in October, which it very well could be, we could try to do it ourselves, but it may not be economical. So.
I'll make a motion then to purchase 2 Hankey snowplows with the 12-foot wings and the installation of the mechanical float from Hankey Manufacturing for a total of $57,850.
Second.
Motion is second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Paul. Item number 5, consider approval of a letter of intent with Gorman and Company Incorporated for preliminary development discussions regarding the redevelopment of the Triangle property in the east side downtown area.
So last time, I think we had a discussion on this, may have been in May, and so we we essentially have taken feedback that was shared by council members at that time, that was shared with city staff, related to aspects to moving forward with the project. I guess Adam can kind of give some more timeline related to the RFQ that went out. This company was the only respondent to it that formally registered interest in the property. And in some further discussion with them a couple of weeks ago, they had indicated still a desire to work with the city. One of the primary questions or concerns that we wanted to explore with them was related to the market rate housing component, knowing that was really a desired component by council members, as well as I think internally it was our shared hope and expectation that that site would receive more scrutiny as it relates to inclusion of market rate housing units. So we did have a discussion with them. It was a very positive discussion, I would say, around their willingness to continue to explore that here and to work toward a goal that maintains our original idea of a concept related to mixed use, meaning first floor retail, commercial, maybe office to some degree, as well as regular market rate housing on the upper floors. So that remains the same. As with any firm, I think it would be safe to expect that without any formal commitment, mutual commitment to work together, it's hard for us to expect them to expend resources, time, or financial resources if it's further exploration of the site, designs, those types of things, without any agreement in place. So we discussed options of what they would feel comfortable receiving from a commitment from us, and then I believe that's really what brought us to here, and then ultimately for a continued discussion at this level. So I'll let Adam maybe talk more about semantics, or Sue. I know we had discussions related to this letter of intent and how there may be some other options that exist, but this felt it gave us kind of the lowest amount of commitment, but yet the most amount of commitment that would suffice their expectation to move forward with further negotiations and exploration on the site.
Yeah, basically we had, I believe, the original deadline in April timeframe for the RFP, and if you recall, we had extended that an additional month and a half or so to try and get some additional entities who were interested. Ultimately, Gorman was the proposal. I think it was a consensus of the council and city staff that if we were to take their initial proposal at face value, it wasn't a fit for what ultimately we had envisioned for the triangle. But as the mayor alluded, there have been conversations back and forth, and there's a willingness on the part of Gorman to continue to look and move their proposal towards what we want to do. But obviously that, as the mayor noted, that takes additional time, research, investment for them to really get a better handle on our current rental market, get a better handle on just the logistics of things such as potential underground parking and other things that will impact the density of the site. And in order to do that, they want at least some sort of commitment to know that if they start doing this 2 weeks from now, we're not going to see another developer and be like, oh, do you want to do this project? And then they're out that money. But ultimately, the letter of intent that Sue drafted up is pretty much as loose as possible. It obligates the city only in the fact that we will basically agree to continue negotiation and working towards a proposal that meets both entities by the end of this year. If at that point there's either the city is uncomfortable or Gorman is uncomfortable, we can kind of walk away and then re-pursue other developers. Or if at that point we think we're on the right page, then we can take the next step to really formalize either through a development agreement or a purchase agreement to continue moving forward on the project. But ultimately, as the mayor noted, very positive conversations with Gorman. We're looking at some alternatives to try and truly bring out that mixed use feel of what potential tenants we can identify for that first floor, because that's a key component to try and make the residential actually work better in this market, because that absorbs a lot of the costs. If you can have the commercial paying basically for the foundation and the first floor, residential becomes cheaper. So a lot of moving parts, all very positive, just looking to give them the comfort that they are looking for.
We also had, as Adam talked about with tenants, I think the reality is, that's going to take some real diligence on everybody's part to secure a good tenant for that in terms of the retail component. So we're kicking around some options related to that convenience and grocery idea. So we're looking at maybe some potential partnerships that if they get to a point where we want to bring them for some agreement for us to continue to work on them, we'll do that. But I think the neat part about it is they're willing to be as creative as necessary to achieve this market rate housing that we're looking to achieve. The other piece to this is I know you get calls from constituents and residents in your districts. I think it's important to remind those folks that this is a long-term proposition. We didn't start packaging and purchasing property to, as much as we all would like to see it redeveloped right away, reality could be otherwise. And I think that, especially if we knew we could get a heavily subsidized housing project there tomorrow, but that isn't necessarily what we've agreed to and desire for highest and best use. So I think it's important just to, when you have these conversations with folks that might be concerned about the city buying property, ultimately we feel and the developer feels that they can make something happen here. It's just going to take, given the amount of moving parts and then just the need to be creative with financing and the other aspects of the project, it's going to take time, and it should take time in order for us to find the right mixture of tenants, whether they're retail or residential tenants alike. So we do appreciate their willingness to come up and expend resources in this market. I mean, they've got a whole state and Midwest that they do business in, and so I believe we owe it to them if they're willing to commit the time and resources that we should give them an agreement to do that. But I think back to the sort of concerns that you might hear in the community. We could get some return on our investment for this property fairly quickly, but is some return better than the maximized return we could get? I don't know, and I think I appreciated the feedback we got to the original proposal. That really helped us be frank with them and craft ultimately, I think, this letter of intent as to where we stand. So it gives us a window of time to continue to have discussions if things are productive, and ultimately we feel they're heading at a pace that we might have a result in a development agreement maybe at some point in the not too distant future. Then we would come back to the committee either with some commitments or some pieces that they're willing to make, or we just decide that we're going to reissue the RFQ or RFP and see what the market looks like again. I mean, I think that affords us some of that time frame or window to be flexible.
I'll make a motion to approve a letter of intent with Gorman and Company Incorporated for a preliminary development discussion regarding the redevelopment of the Triangle property in the east side downtown area.
I'll second. Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 6, consider approval of a development agreement with North Point Development Corp. for the development of real estate located at 2330 16th Street South as set forth in the real estate sales agreement previously approved with North Point.
Today actually I just spoke with Annie Dumke from North Point. You may remember probably back in January when you agreed to sell the land at 16th and Pepper to North Point for their multifamily housing development, that we had talked about the terms of sale, and we basically were selling it to them for $1. And however, we were going to have a development agreement that would attempt to recover that money. We talked about impact fees, and that was not going to be an option. Then we talked about a guarantee of a tax increment above what we believe their taxable assessment to be. So then that excess would basically come to the city to pay for the property. I just talked to Andy today, and he said they're in a position to probably just give us an amount of money up front right now rather than having to go through, call it a tax assessment. So, and they're not in a great rush to have that done by this month. So I'm asking that we hold this over, and then more than likely next month we'll have something that might be just a lump sum payment rather than tax payments over a number of years. So I'd ask that it be held over.
Okay.
I think they're planning on closing probably October, first week in October or so. That's what it's kind of looking like.
I was just going to add that I believe they're aiming for September Plan Commission for their site plan review that is required, which will be for that October closing, so they would have all their other ducks in a row for that project to break ground yet this year.
Anyone else have anything to add? Item number 7, consider approval of resolution number 20-2017, budget amendment number 2.
Okay, I have a revised budget amendment. Basically, the revision is the purchase of the property. Since we weren't taking up that item tonight, so I just obviously include that in a future resolution when that item comes to the agenda. But basically, what this budget resolution is doing is, where I'll just kind of walk down the funds, is the housing rehab and Hickory funds. Basically, this is our housing program where we receive loan payments in on loans that we've made through the program, and then we use that money to basically make new loans, so it's a revolving loan. And basically this is just amending the budget to reflect the actual activity for the first 6 months of the year. The grants and donations funds, these are grants and donations that we've gotten in so far this year that were unanticipated, unbudgeted, and so basically what we're doing is we're just appropriating that money over to the expenditure account. One is the federal forfeiture revenue, and that's in the police department. They receive federal monies for forfeited assets, and so basically that's just appropriating a line item in there, and based on that program, they can use it on specific purposes. Gifts and donations, the big one there is that we received the Tuskegee Memorial to be earmarked for improvements at the city zoo, so we're just basically putting that in the zoo outlay line item, so it's dedicated for that purpose. And every year the library gets a $10,000 contribution from the Mead Witter, and we're just appropriating that over to there. The debt service transfer from other funds, if you remember when we issued the $4.5 million bonds earlier this year, that came with a premium, and basically that premium gets transferred into the debt service fund for future debt payments, and so that's just adjusting that budget to reflect that transfer. The Aquatics and Riverbank Fund, when we adopted the 2017 budget, we budgeted the aquatics facility based on as a one-year project and financing, and then as we got into that project, we're splitting that financing over 2 years in the project, so I'm just adjusting that budget to reflect the amount that we borrowed this year for the aquatics facility, and then we'll budget the second half of that project in the 2018 budget, so I'm adjusting those accounts to reflect that, and some of the proceeds for long-term debt, the debt issuance costs, squaring that up and adjusting those budgets to reflect actual, and also the Legacy Foundation contribution towards the Mead Splash Pad of $575,000. So, and if you flip over, in the original 2017 carryover amendment for the building acquisition fund, we had a SAG grant of $150,000 that was in that appropriation, but the demolition costs came in very favorably, so we did not end up drawing down the entire grant, but those total grant proceeds were contained in the carryover appropriation, so I'm just adjusting that budget downward to reflect that we didn't draw down the entire grant because the cost came in substantially lower than anticipated. So basically that's the resolution, if there's any questions.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 20-2017 budget amendment number 2.
Second it.
Motion and a second to approve the resolution. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item number 8, beverage operator license applications.
Make a motion to approve the beverage operator license application as presented.
I'll second. Motion and a second to approve. All in favor?
There's one denial, it should be noted.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Terry did.
Who's second?
I did. Any opposed? That motion carried. Item number 9, audit of the bills. And I did not get that in my attachment.
It wasn't in the
I didn't see it.
I just saw it just now in the packet. That was
finance packet?
Yeah. I think just pulled up during the meeting. At least.
I saw that and had the numbers on my computer.
Okay.
Not working, so.
One sent out Friday.
Yeah, that was in there.
Tail end of
I
it.
just didn't write the numbers down.
68,292. Want to look through it real quick, or I have a copy here?
Yeah, I only got the agenda for some reason. Where's it? Unless it was just an email maybe. I'll make a motion to approve check number 067645 through 068904 and manual checks 099309 through 099326. Does that sound right?
I'll second that.
Motion and second to approve the bills. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 10, in open session, the committee will vote to go into closed session under section 19.85, parent 1, parent E of the Wisconsin statutes, which reads, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Sub A, in closed session, the committee will discuss the status of a promissory note from ECC Corrosions Incorporated and a request to extend the terms of the promissory note dated August 31st, 2016. Sub B, the committee will return to open session. Sub C, the committee may consider extending a promissory note from ECC Corrosions Incorporated dated August 31st, 2016.
They don't have to go in closed session, do they?
No, you wouldn't have to, but, yeah, I mean, if you're okay talking about it in front of anyone that's here.
So we don't need to go into closed.
Well, if you're okay with the, you know, if you're reviewing, okay with the terms here, I mean.
You could just go right ahead.
You could just,
That's what we
yeah.
talked about, right?
Yeah, yep. So, I mean, here's a, it's up to you.
2,000 or something, and, you know, okay, that's what we talked about.
Last one.
Plus the interest, okay.
$2,000 monthly payments, principal payments plus interest.
Make a motion to consider extending promissory note to EC Corrosion Incorporated dated August 30, well, a new promissory note, I guess this would be, right?
Yeah.
But the terms we had discussed and presented here today.
Yeah, basically, and then it's doesn't have a balloon payment, it's just taking the $2,000 principal monthly payments till it's paid off with interest, and the same default language security that the previous notes had, so basically the big changes.
A little over 2 years.
Right. So,
A second.
Motion and a second to approve the
New promissory.
new promissory note.
with $2,000 monthly principal
Yeah,
payment.
The principal payment going up $1,000, right?
Annual principal, annual interest rate of
Plus
4.5%. Let's get that in the motion, so.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Item number 11, set date for next meeting. Looking at September 12th.
Does that sound right? Sounds right, doesn't it?
We'll do it the second Tuesday.
Yep.
It's a week
Yeah,
after
everybody's
Labor Day.
okay with that?
Yeah, it works better for you, right? Or-
Oh, it just gives us some more time to get information together and out, but it's,
I won't be here.
You won't?
No, I'll be in Jamaica.
Yeah, so 5 countries now, you know. That's Europe.
12?
Well, the council meeting's 22nd, right? Unless you wanna do it like that.
Council meeting would be the 19th.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in August.
Yeah, you're in August, the 19th is council.
Okay.
Still 12. Does that work?
Yeah, that works for me, I guess. I'd rather go with half, but it works for me.
Well, we can make it.
You can always phone in.
Yeah, I'm on
Facebook Live.
Yeah, I'm on
Facebook Live.
December 12th. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries, we are adjourned.
River Riders Bike Share, one of Wisconsin's first rural bike share programs, is located in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. It makes community-donated bicycles available for residents, visitors, and commuters to adventure throughout the area. Each bicycle is painted a Wisconsin Rapids signature cranberry red color